All right, hey everyone, Jeff here at StopPirates.blogspot.com. I think what we're living in here is called an ineptocracy. You ever heard of this? It's a system of government where the least capable to lead are elected by the least capable of producing, and where the members of society least likely to sustain themselves or succeed are rewarded with goods and services paid for by the confiscated wealth of a diminishing number of producers. That's it. So how did this United States get started? Certain members of Congress created the District of Columbia, D.C., from portions of two states, Virginia and Maryland, Virgin Mary. Physically united together, they are Virgin Mary, to form a more perfect union as a new United States. U.S. titles and codes in their awkward definitions call D.C. the United States. The new United States includes states such as District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, the Virgin Islands, and the Northern Mariana Islands. It does not include the 50 states united. Title 26, 7701. All titles of the United States Code USC are strictly meant for the United States and none of the 50 states of the Union. Each of the 50 states have their own constitutions and laws. And there's at least two cases that clearly state the United States is not the 50 states of the Union. All rule comes from District of Columbia, which is run by a Gnostic priesthood of an undisclosed mystery Babylon under Masonic rule. Some of the Masonic symbolism is found in the layout of the district's streets, Washington Monument, Obelisk, the Pentagon, and on the back of the $1 Federal Reserve note. Columbia is named for goddess of creation, war, and destruction, more known as the goddess of death and pain. She is derived from the imagery of Semiramis, wife of Nimrod and queen of Babylon. The statue on top of the Capitol building, called the Statue of Freedom, is actually Persephone, meaning she who destroys the light. She is the queen of the underworld. She is crowned with pentacles, pentagrams, stars with 5 points. When someone stands on something, it usually is an indication of ownership. Therefore, she owns the facility she stands upon. Although the dome on the top of the Capitol building was not finished until 1868, the final installation of this statue on top of the dome took place on December 2nd, 1863. The original Capitol building without the dome was completed in 1826. Columbia and Persephone are seen as other statues around Washington, D.C. area. And you'll notice on the obelisk, the Washington Monument, there's the reflecting pool right in front of it, and that's where they operate, in the reflection upside down. Some of the Gnostic priesthood include Illuminati, Skull and Bone Society, Hospitallers, Knights of Malta, Knights of Columbus, Knights of the Round Table, Oddfellows, Society of Jesus, Jesuits, Jesuit priesthood, Club of Rome, Knights Templars, Freemasons, Scottish Rite Temple, York Rite Temple, Shriners, Inter-Temple Bar, International Temple Bar Association, Barristers Inn, Zionists, Jesuits, Jesuit Brotherhood, Milner Group, aka Milner's Kindergarten, Round Table Group, Rhodes Crowd, Rhodes Scholars, the Times Crowd, All Souls Group, Cliveden Set, the Society of the Elect, the Association of Helpers, Genta of Three, the Secret Society of Cecil Rhodes, Chatham House Crowd, Commonwealth of Nations, Royal Institute of International Affairs, Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg Group, Council on Foreign Relations, Magistrates, Bar Attorneys. Since 1873, the global elite has held secret meetings in the ancient redwood forests of Northern California. It's going on right now, I believe. Members of the so-called Bohemian Club include former Presidents Eisenhower, Nixon, and Reagan. The Bush family maintains a strong involvement Each year at Bohemian Grove, members of this all-male club put on red, black, and silver robes and conduct an occult ritual wherein they worship a giant stone owl, sacrificing a human being in effigy to what they call the Great Owl of Bohemia. And there actually is, if you look at a $1 bill, which appears on the upper right-hand corner of the $1 bill, it's a small owl. So they put a little small Moloch in there just for the fun of it. I don't have a dollar bill on me, or it's kind of hard to. Oh yeah, I do. It's going to be like right up there. You see that? Right there. The little indentation right there. Little guy right there. Little owl. The original organic constitution was adopted by the corporation as its bylaws. The original 13th Amendment was replaced, and the other amendments added, some by fraud. The 14th Amendment was not ratified. The 14th Amendment never passed. And the 16th Amendment was not ratified by the states. So what is a democracy? Excuse me. Democracy is the next thing to socialism, which is another form of communism. You know, if you could read the Communist Manifesto, I mean, everything's, the central bank is the big one. They control everything. Democracy means priest rule. A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist until the voters discovers that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury. From that moment on, the majority always votes for the candidates promising them the most benefits from the public treasury. With the result of that, a democracy always collapses over a loose fiscal policy, always followed by a dictatorship. The average age of the world's greatest civilizations from the beginning of history has been about 200 years. During those 200 years, these nations always progress through the following sequence: from bondage to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to great courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependency, from dependency back again to bondage. Democracy can be explained as two wolves and a lamb voting over what's for dinner. A political system calculated to make an intelligent minority subject to the will of the stupid. Or mob rule. Mob rule is a form of government giving the impression of representation and rule by its citizens. But today, if one follows the paper trail, one would come to believe that it is ruled by a Crown of England, Crown Templar, and the Vatican together pulling the strings in Washington, D.C., as well as utilizing the mob rule principle. Some believe the Roman Pope is in control, but actually the unseen, behind the scenes, Black Pope is the one in power. The one most people never hear about and or knows exists. The other Pope is just a figurehead for the people to see and relate with. Here's a quote. One must admire the craft of the priests, spawn of Satan, known as esquires, members of the court of St. James of the Middle Temple Bar of the Knights Templar, which is headquartered in the Crown, which is inside the ancient walled city of London, and the sovereign nation, and is a sovereign nation just like the Vatican and Washington, D.C., i.e. the triad that controls the world, the ring of power. So the Vatican controls the world spiritually, the inner city of London controls the world financially, and the District of Columbia controls the world militarily. That's what we've been raised to do. And their job is almost done because they've taken over just about every country, their financial system. The large Egyptian symbol called the obelisk can be found in each of the 3 locations: the London financial area, the Vatican, and Washington, D.C. These are the pharaohs of old. They're still around. They built the pyramids. They didn't go anywhere. And now they have a base in Switzerland. Expands and conquers by deceit and fraud, and uses words of art to deceive, convinces Americans to utilize such words and terms as residence or reside and U.S. citizen, regional designations, fictional overlays such as California is CA, abbreviation NV for Nevada, TX for Texas, etc., and addresses to expand its venue and control, and to obtain certificates of birth, and to sign up for Social Security to gain and maintain jurisdiction. You know, there was a time when there wasn't such a thing as a U.S. citizen. You were a citizen of the state that you lived in. I mean, here in North America. And the first U.S. citizens were the black slaves that were freed. You know, this could be hyperbole or what do you call it? But the federal government, I think, paid $60 or $600 for each black slave, made them U.S. citizens. Give away your rights, land, parks, streams, over to foreign governments such as the United Nations by executive orders and by decree, and calling them biospheres, biosphere reserves, World Heritage Sites, or some other designated names. It's planning according to Article 4 of UNESCO's statutory framework for UN biosphere reserves. They sold everything off to them. The United Nations is just another corporation. This corporate so-called government sees itself as God. It sets morals and values of those in its jurisdiction without any basis. These values are ever changing at their whim and are influenced by opinion and the media. Emphasizes religious and social tolerance but discourages Christianity. It provokes the godly to give up their stand and to go with the crowd. Homosexuality and abortions are no longer discouraged but now are protected. Thus, it is easy to understand how law, instead of the checking injustice, becomes the invincible weapon of injustice. It is easy to understand why the law is used by the legislator to destroy in varying degrees among the rest of the people their personal independence by slavery, their liberty by oppression, and their property by plunder. This is done for the benefit of the person who makes the law, and in proportion to the power he holds. It erases from everyone's conscious the distinction between justice and injustice. No society can exist unless the laws are respected to a certain degree. The safest way to make laws respected is to make them respectable. When law and morality contradict each other, the citizen has a cruel alternative to either of losing their moral sense or losing his respect for the law. The United States continues to be in a permanent state of national emergency since March 9, 1933, and possibly as far back, yeah, it is. As far back as the Civil War. We're under the Lieber Code. Look that up. General Orders 100. It's an operating standard for when you go into a country and take it over. There's certain laws that you must abide by. On April 15, 1861, President Lincoln reconvened Congress under the executive branch by proclamation. Quote, I do hereby, in virtue of the power in me vested by the Constitution, convene both houses of Congress. President Lincoln. Caesar, president, is now in full control, even over the Senate and the Congress. A presidential dictatorship has been imposed on U.S. citizens. The sad thing is most Americans don't even realize it yet. The corporate government created in 1871 will continue to exist as long as a state of war or emergency exists. War on drugs, war on poverty, war on terrorism, war in Iraq. Now I think it's war on death with COVID-19. The president does not terminate martial or emergency powers by executive order or decree, or the people do not resist submission and terminate restoring lawful civil courts, processing, and procedures under authority of the inherent political powers of the people. The 14th Amendment, for all intents and purposes, does not exist. On March 28, 1861, Congress adjourned sine die and never was reconvened de jure. The original 13th Amendment, no titles of nobility, that's esquires or lawyers, approved by 13 of the 17 states, March 12, 1819, and thereby ratified, is the last proper draft of the de jure amendment, but is not recognized by the corporate de facto United States. The original 13th Amendment prohibits esquires or attorneys from holding positions of public office. Now they're all fucking attorneys. I mean, excuse my French. Let's talk about the flag for a minute. It's not the original USA military flag. Some say it's a flag of an Admiralty maritime type jurisdiction and is not supposed to be used on land. Others say it's not a flag at all, but a fiction. However, the gold fringe which surrounds the flag gives notice that the American flag has been captured and is now being used as corporate so-called government to give notice of its jurisdiction. The flag appears to be a U.S. flag, but it has to have one or more of the following: gold fringe along its borders called a badge, gold braided cord or tassel hanging from the pole, a ball on top pole, last cannonball fired, mainly used in induction centers, eagle on top of the pole, and spear on top of the pole. You can go pretty deep into flag history and what they mean, the dimensions of it. The president, a Caesar, rules by executive power, which is unconstitutional. Congress and the courts are under the president. Do you ever wonder why Congress is ignored by the president? The president is the chief executive officer or CEO of a government corporation. Impeachment today is nearly impossible unless it is the best interest of the controlling bankers and the one world government elite. Also, the most people do not realize that that most courts today are legislative courts and not judicial. The so-called corporate Congress sits by resolution, not by positive law. Therefore, the position of powers is as follows. President, CEO of the corporation sits as Caesar and does not need congressional approval. The legislature, the new Congress, and the Senate voices public opinion. So-called judicial legislative Article 1 courts opinionate what's best for the corporate so-called government and the elite. And for the non-existent judicial Article 3 courts, except for special circumstances that benefit the elite. The top positions the top position has control over the second position, and the second position has control over the last position, vertically and not laterally. There are no checks and balances unless the president is concerned with the potential revolution based on the outcry of its citizens. Each puppet that comes into office wears a different costume but ends up serving the same master. The masters are the elite and the bankers operating behind the scenes. Only 2 executive orders were overturned. The Supreme Court ruled in Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company versus Sawyer that Executive Order 10,340 from President Harry S. Truman placing all steel mills in the country under federal control was invalid because it attempted to make law. And a 1996 order issued by President Clinton that attempted to prevent the U.S. government from contracting with organizations that had strike breakers on the payroll. Congress may overturn an executive order by passing legislation in conflict with it or by refusing to approve funding to enforce it. In the former, the president retains the power to veto such a decision. However, the Congress may override the veto with 2/3 majority at the end of the executive order. Phony money, not backed by assets, but thrives on faith alone. Today, all computer programs, stock certificates, financial paper, accounting records, balance sheets, and summary bills, bonds, promissory notes, bank paper, such as checks, etc., use a familiar symbol of the dollar sign, which has only one line through it, an S with one line through it, denote the amount of debt considered. All notes are IOUs, including Federal Reserve notes. Federal Reserve notes, all notes represent debt. This corporate United States is in bankruptcy and has no assets but can only monetize debt. Legal tender consists of Federal Reserve notes, bonds, other notes, evidences of debt, tokens, clad coinage having no inherent asset value in a unit of debt, and a cashless society electronic banking issued by the Federal Reserve Bank, a private corporation created by the Bank of England in 1913 and is owned by foreign bankers and investors. The Federal Reserve is a continuation of the exchequer of the Crown of England. Edward Mandell House was instrumental in setting up the Federal Reserve. Some people think the Federal Reserve Bank or U.S. government are U.S. government institutions. They are not government institutions. They are private credit monopolies which prey upon the people of the U.S. for the benefit of themselves and their foreign and domestic swindlers and rich and predatory moneylenders. Chairman Lewis T. McFadden, House Banking and Currency Committee, June 10, 1933. Federal Reserve is not listed under the federal government. They are in the white pages along with the Federal Express, Federal Deposit Insurance Corp., and other businesses. Find out for yourself if this is all true, and then go to your local law library and look at the case of Lewis versus U.S. case 80-5905, 9th Circuit, June 24, 1982. It reads in part, examining the organization and the function of the Federal Reserve Bank and applying the relevant factors, we conclude that the Federal Reserve is not federal instrumentalities, but are independent and privately owned and controlled corporations. Federal Reserve banks are listed neither as wholly owned government corporations under 31 U.S.C. Section 846, nor as mixed ownership corporations under 31 U.S.C. Section 856, 28 U.S.C. Sections 134. The amount of Federal Reserve notes printed is based upon the corporate government's borrowing or appetite for debt. For example, if the corporate government prints $100 billion in interest-bearing U.S. bonds and takes them to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve places $100 billion in the checking account of the government, $100 billion in checking account, and the government writes checks or prints debt currency against the balance. In other words, this private banking system creates so-called money out of thin air, and the bankers get the interest on it forever. In addition, a new debt and debt currency has to be created just to cover the compounding interest. It's an ideal Ponzi scheme. Keep in mind that bonds are IOUs also and are to be paid back by the people through their future labor and for the labor and by the labor of their posterity. That is why wars are created and perpetuated, government bank bureaucracy and empire building increases, and superfluous spending continues. They create an ongoing and ever-increasing debt to enslave the people and their posterity. Debt must be continually created to feed the debt credit economy system. The so-called expanding economy always needs new debt notes, Federal Reserve notes, and therefore more debt must be created. Budgets can never be balanced in this time of system. In this type of system, if the budget is balanced, the economy will collapse because new Federal Reserve notes cannot be printed and no new debt credit created. Now think about that for a minute. If they ever paid off the national debt, there would be no money in circulation because it's all debt. And now look how many trillions they're printing. I think they're printing these trillions. They're kind of front running because when you pay off a certain amount of debt is placed on every U.S. citizen. And when you eliminate the debtor, you eliminate the debt. And these bonds are insured, so they get paid off in the insurance, plus the debt gets eliminated. So it allows them to borrow more and more money. The silver content of dimes and quarters was completely eliminated under the Coinage Act of 1965, and the silver content of the half dollars was greatly reduced and or eliminated since then. Coins that no longer have silver content are called copper nickel clad coins, or just clad coins, and have no intrinsic value. In 1982, the cent was changed from being 95% copper to 5% zinc to copper plated zinc, weighting 20% less. The cent is now just like a token. U.S. citizen, we're the subjects compared to what's called a sovereign. A sovereign is a living soul coming out of the mother's womb into the land of one of the several states of America are sovereign, free man, free inhabitants, or freeborn, unless that right is given up knowingly, intentionally, and voluntarily upon full disclosure. A subject or a U.S. citizen is chattel property, or belligerents in the field and are subject to its jurisdiction, Washington, D.C. U.S. citizens are 14th Amendment citizens implemented by the Civil Rights Act of 1866, originally established for the newly freed slaves, that is to say, now slaves of the corporate government plantation. Today, almost all mothers, black or white, unknowingly inform on their own babies. Take a look at the so-called birth certificate of live birth, where the mother signs, and you will see in the title box stating in small print, mother or other informant. The word other makes the mother an informant. By signing the birth certificate as an informer, she contracts with the government, putting her child and her child's future labor as collateral for the national debt, servitude, slavery. The father or mother can rescind the contract within 3 business days under truth in lending. Since a birth certificate never lists the father as the husband, nor lists the wife's acceptance of the father's surname as her own, but has the mother's maiden name instead, the baby is considered a bastard. Bastards are therefore under the care and control of the priest rule, democracy, and can be taken from the mother at any time. The hospitals receive a fairly large monetary benefit, $3,000 or more or less, per child for the corporate government, from the corporate government, for having birth certificates filled out and signed. The primary control and custody of infants is with the government. Tillman versus Roberts. Your legal name is a prisoner of war name, fictitious non de jure name for a non-living entity, also referred to as the straw man or the transmitting utility. Your name in all capital letters, aka all caps, which is a format called capitis diminutia maxima. Capitis diminutia maxima means a man's condition changed from freedom to bondage and becomes a slave or an item of inventory. U.S. citizens were declared enemies of the U.S. by FDR by Executive Order number 2040 and ratified by Congress on March 9, 1933, 48 Stat 1. FDR changed the meaning of the Trading with the Enemy Act on December 6, 1917 by changing the word without to citizens within the United States. They had to do that to steal all the gold, House Joint Resolution 192. But they did. They give you a remedy in that if you look to it. Because if they take away your ability to pay for anything, you can't pay for anything. You can't discharge a debt with a debt. They want you to pay a debt with a debt note, but we're just exchanging debt note papers. It's promise to pay what? Promise to pay, promise to pay. People become surety for the debt by a number of different ways. One is by the birth certificate. When a baby's footprint is placed thereon, before it touches the land, the certificate is recorded at the county recorder, then sent to a Secretary of State, which sends it to the Bureau of Census and of Commerce and of the Commerce Department. This process converts a man's life, labor, and property to an asset of the U.S. government. When this person receives a benefit from the government, such as a driver's license, food stamps, free mail, your stimulus check, delivery, etc., mail delivery, this person becomes a fictional persona in commerce. The birth certificate is an unrevealed trust instrument originally designed for the children of the newly freed black slaves after the 14th Amendment. The U.S. has the ability to tax and regulate commerce. The government-issued birth certificate is now a registered security, which initially has an estimated value of $3 million. They are circulated around the world as collateral for loans and entered on an asset side of a ledger, just like any other security. This is why they are intentionally filed with the Commerce Department. The central banks now have a negotiable instrument against which credit is advanced by the international funding community, namely the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, Bank of International Settlements, Bank of England, Federal Bank of America, etc. Bond servants. To cover the debt in 1933, the future debt, the corporate government determined that established the value of the future labor of each individual in its jurisdiction to be approximately $630,000. A bond of $630,000 is set on each certificate of live birth. The certificates are bundled together into sets and then placed as securities on the open market. These certificates are then purchased by Federal Reserve and/or foreign bankers. The purchaser is the holder of title. This process made each and every person in the jurisdiction a bond servant. None are more enslaved than those who falsely believe that they are free. Registering to vote is an admission that the declarant is subject to the exclusive legislative power of the corporate Congress and is a 14th Amendment citizen residing in a federal territory. That's why I tell you, man, you need to resend your vote, your voter's registration. Just go to your Secretary of State website, whatever state you're in, and go to voting, and then you can download the paper that you need to sign and send back to them. Get me off your list. The right to vote at any election is denied except for participation in rebellion or another crime. Rather than remaining a state national, one becomes a U.S. citizen participating in the rebellion by voting in the corporate government system and/or by signing up for benefits and privileges. Stop and think for a moment as to voting. When you vote for an office to be filled in the United States of America or one of its subcorporations, the state of wherever, you have voted to fill a fictional corporate position designed to represent the corporation, not a political position to represent the people. All elections in the United States are nothing more than proxy fights in a boardroom. There are more people receiving government benefits today than ever. Most of these people are Democrats and vote for the people who are Democrats. Reason being, the Democratic Party provides and creates more benefit programs and services to attain votes and popularity. Also, there are more people coming from Mexico, legally or illegally, amnesty or not, who know that the benefits are mostly created by Democrats and will always vote for Democrats or convince others to do so. And these numbers increase, and it will be very difficult for any non-Democrat to win an election. The elite and the major media have the people pitting the Democrats against the Republicans, or vice versa. The Democrats get in, the people find negative consequences, and then they vote Republican. The Republicans get in, the people find negative consequences and vote for Democrat next election. In the meantime, the one world government elite's agenda is being fulfilled. People have to wake up and realize that this is a corporation doing business disguised as the form of government and is not the government originally instituted in the 1700s. Stop playing their fucking game. Go to stopthepirates.blogspot.com. Thanks.